p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that need looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy, and here's what we're discussing on the show. Vladimir Putin could launch a nuclear weapon if Russia loses in Ukraine. That's the warning from US intelligence chiefs. We'll be asking the experts if he could go nuclear. And as Boris bolsters Sweden and Finland's case to join NATO with a trip to the Nordic nations, would it be a provocation too far for the Russian president? Plus, as the government wobbles on plans to build hundreds of thousands of new homes, I'm asking if the next generation will ever own their own property. All that and the Rwanda migrant plan. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to get off your chest? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @gbnews. But first, it's time for news headlines with Rosie. Good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister has signed a historic security agreement with Sweden as the Nordic country considers joining NATO. Speaking in the last couple of minutes, Boris Johnson said war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. He's due to sign a similar declaration with Finland later today, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted a re-evaluation of the Nordic countries' membership of NATO. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to respond if they join the military alliance.
The war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. But sovereign nations must be free to make those decisions without fear or influence or threat of retaliation. So I'm very pleased today with you, Prime Minister Andersson, to sign this mutual security assurances declaration.
In Ukraine, new drone footage shows a Russian tank being destroyed in the Kharkiv region as the country pushes a counter-offensive in the north. Ukraine's Ministry of Defence claims the attack was carried out on Russia's most advanced tank. The UK military intelligence says Ukraine has successfuli struck Russian air defences and resupplied vessels with drones. It says the US House of Representatives approved more than £33 billion more military aid for Ukraine. An economic think tank is warning Britain's on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. Helen Barnard from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation told GB News the government's existing support package of £22 billion doesn't go far enough.
I think it's extraordinary that they are saying it's fine, everything's OK, we'll wait till the autumn. Because for people at the very sharpest end of this, They are missing, essentials now. They're getting into debt now. Their health is getting hammered now. Their mental health is getting eroded by that constant anxiety of how on earth am I going to feed the family and keep things going.
Millions of renters living in unsafe conditions should have their homes improved under major housing reforms. The Levelling Up Secretary announced the new Renters Reform Bill will be extended to nearly 4.5 million households. The plans will help tenants living in damp, unsafe and cold homes and protect them from eviction notices without reason. Michael Gove also announced an overhaul to planning permission, which could see neighbours voting on home developments, including extensions in their street. The Foreign Secretary says the UK will not shy away from taking action over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Liz Truss says proposals put forward by the EU would take the country backwards and cause more checks, paperwork and disruption. The DUP is refusing to form a devolved government in Northern Ireland until issues with the protocol are resolved. Sinn Féin Vice President Michelle O'Neill says it's unacceptable for the DUP to block the nomination of a new speaker.
It's not good enough for the people here that the DUP are holding society to ransom, punishing society, preventing the establishment of a speaker and an executive to actually respond to the things that the people are worried about right now, the cost of living crisis and the health service. So I don't think it's acceptable, the position that Jeffrey Donaldson has articulated today. But I'll make this call to him again today. Join with the rest of the parties who will be there on Friday.
A journalist been killed while reporting on a raid by Israeli security forces in the West Bank. Broadcaster Al Jazeera says their reporter, Shireen Abu Akleh, had been shot deliberately by Israeli forces in the city of Jenin. Israel's military says there's a possibility reporters were hit by shots fired by Palestinian gunmen. Face masks will no longer be mandatory in airports and on flights in Europe from Monday of next week. That's the new recommendation from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and the EU's Aviation Safety Agency. Airlines have been told to encourage passengers to wear face masks on flights to or from countries where it's still required on public transport. A 150-year-old handwritten letter by Florence Nightingale is being put on show for the first time. In the letter, written in 1872, the pioneering nurse gave her support to a campaign led by the suffragettes to create a female teacher training college. That college is now known as the University of Chichester, where it will be displayed to celebrate International Nursing Day tomorrow. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex and We Need to Talk About.
When the director of America's national intelligence warns something, you should probably listen, especially when that advice is an official briefing to her own government. Well, top US spy chief Avril Haines has told the Senate that Putin could go nuclear if he loses in Ukraine. Now, these are not rabble-rousers, right and left, outbidding each other on arguments against NATO. This is not shock and awful headlines being pumped out from the Kremlin. This is an official position that so far has not made much of a ripple in news over here. The threat of a long, bloody war of attrition is becoming increasingly likely. But the problem is, Russia's conventional capabilities do not match up with Putin's ambitions, which could mean he resorts to more drastic measures. These, Haines warns, could include martial law in Russia to bend the entire country towards his war effort, and if Putin still felt the war was not going for him, putting his presidency in peril, the use of a nuclear warhead. So what on earth does the West do with that sort of intelligence? What a harrowing choice to have to make if Haines is right. As Boris Johnson heads from Sweden to Finland to urge NATO membership, there are chilling warnings this could be regarded as provocative by Moscow. But leaving these nations out in the cold, defenceless and vulnerable to a bloodthirsty neighbour, is equally a choice few would want to take. Well, joining me on the show is Niall Gardner, who's the foreign policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation in the United States, and Philip Ingram, who's a former senior military intelligence officer and NATO planner. I'm going to start, first of all, with you, Niall. I mean, I've seen that this particular warning by Haynes has made a number of headlines in America, not so much over here. What's been the reaction stateside?
Well, Alex, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And as you point out, I remember of threatening, menacing language from Moscow, and Putin is making clear that the use of nuclear weapons certainly is an option on the table for the Russians, and very seriously. And as you also mentioned, I think there's a lack of perhaps seriousness in terms of the response action from the West, and the stakes are incredibly high here. We are dealing with a Russian regime that is dangerous, brutal, barbaric, has acted in an extremely savage manner in Ukraine, certainly is capable of anything. And our message must be, of course, to the Russians that we will respond with strength and resolve to any kind of aggression, any kind of provocative action on their path. And so we have to follow, I think, in my view, the principles outlined by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, peace through strength. And the message must be conveyed to Vladimir Putin that any use, of course, of nuclear weapons will be met with a proportional response from the West. That will as a deterrent against the Russians. It would be suicide for the Russians to move forward with the use of nuclear weapons. After all, NATO is a nuclear alliance. It will defend itself. A nuclear war would be the end of Russia. And that is the reality. We have to make that very clear, actually, to Vladimir Putin. I think he understands that. But we must not in any way give in to aggression, to provocation, to the kind of bullying language. He seeks to intimidate the West. Putin believes he can split the NATO alliance. He thinks he can, intimidate the likes of, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, for example, and maybe he can, but he cannot intimidate the United Kingdom, the United States, and the NATO alliance as a whole. So we must be strong and resolute in the face of.
Now, Philip, I know we've discussed this before, but we've been used to hearing propaganda coming from the Kremlin that Putin would use nuclear power against NATO if they decide to expand, if NATO got involved in the war. We're used to hearing people debate this and saying that NATO expansion could lead to a big escalation. But this is the head of the US intelligence agency. I mean, that's pretty big, isn't it? Are you worried by these comments?
It is pretty big, and it's important that it's put out there because it is a possibility. We're a long way off it at the moment, but it is a possibility. And not every use of a nuclear weapon would automatically result in a NATO nuclear response. There would have to be a NATO response. It would be overwhelmingly conventional, and it would damage the Russians even more, forcing them potentially to run up that nuclear escalation ladder, as we've discussed beforehand, very quickly indeed. And that's something that the international community, it's important that they sit and discuss and examine. And of course, the three world leaders that are critical in this are Joe Biden, Boris Johnson and Francois Macron as the Western leaders that are in there. But if Russia used anything like a nuclear weapon or a tactical nuclear weapon, they would break the tacit support that they've got from the likes of China, India and Pakistan. So Putin would have to weigh up very carefully any benefits for him against any pain that there would be for him in getting on with it. He knows that he does not want to attack NATO, and he does not want to go to a complete nuclear exchange, because that would not destroy Russia. That would destroy the Northern Hemisphere and the world.
Yeah, I mean, that is a pretty perilous apocalyptic zero-sum game. But, I mean, what choice are the West left with now? If essentially what Haynes is saying, unless Putin gets some kind of scalp, things could get quickly out of hand. I mean, what I want to know is how many hurdles there are between Vladimir Putin and the big red button. Have you got any idea about that, Philip?
Well, it all comes down to the Russian doctrine. And this is where the interpretation of the doctrine and their definitions of when they can authorize nuclear release and how that plays out in Ukraine. It all comes down to what is described as an existential threat against Russia. Now, whether that existential threat is a defeat in Ukraine, whether it is taking the disputed Donbass region or threatening Crimea, which Russia is now suggesting is part of Russia, whether it's the potential for the Ukrainians, supported by all of the NATO weapons that are going in, to attack into Russia. And we've already seen the Ukrainians physically attacking into Russia, into supply bases. And therefore, it's Putin's interpretation of that. But again, the use of a tactical weapon would be, if Putin decided to do that, it would be a last resort thing to do, because of the way that it would affect his relationship with China, India, and Pakistan, and other nations. But he could use it to break the horns of the dilemma, where he can't lose, but Zelensky can't let him win. But try and force President Zelensky to the negotiating table to say, look, let's agree that I can keep what I've got and you leave me alone, and we move away from there. And the use of a small tactical nuclear weapon inside Ukraine, in an area which is depopulated, would send a very clear message if he put the threat out to say Kiev or Lviv would be next. But it's important the international community gives a very resounding message back, saying anything like that is unacceptable. And whilst it may not necessarily trigger an immediate nuclear response, the response would be overwhelming and Russia will lose.
Now, today, Niall, Boris Johnson has been in Finland and Sweden urging them to join NATO, and actually coming out of a new defence pact with them, promising to send RAF, army and naval troops and assets to those countries. And I get the impression here in the United Kingdom, we're relatively comfortable with the idea of NATO expansion, if not encourage it, in fact. But the response in America has quite often been different to that, seeing it perhaps through the prism of Putin, not condoning his position, but saying, well, look, if you take the man at his word, even if it's only a slim chance, the outcome could be devastating. Are there still people in the United States holding that position? And what do you think their response would be today at the idea that perhaps Finland and Sweden could indeed join the alliance?
That's a good question, Alex. And I would say that, there is overwhelming support in Washington generally for the expansion of the NATO alliance. And I think most members of Congress are strongly in favour of bringing in Finland and Sweden. There's a small minority perhaps who are not. But I would say the overwhelming sort of view here in DC certainly is that NATO expansion is the right thing to do. You have to send a clear message to Putin that he cannot intimidate NATO. Putin does not have a veto over who joins the alliance. And it is only natural, of course, that Finland and Sweden wish to join. And Boris Johnson, I think, his leadership on this issue and on the Ukraine issue as a whole has been outstanding. And I think that, there's an acknowledgement of that here in the United States, that British leadership has been strong and powerful on this issue. And I think the US and the UK stand overwhelmingly in unity with regard to bringing on board Finland and Sweden. This sends the right message to Putin. NATO must become stronger, and we have to convey clearly to the Kremlin that Russia has no right to say anything at all about the expansion of the NATO alliance. NATO is a defensive alliance, and it has to become stronger. It has to expand, I think, to do so. And I think the addition of Finland and Sweden would be a tremendous additional advantage, actually, to the strength of the NATO alliance. So I do hope this will move forward swiftly this year.
Niall, Philip, thank you so much for coming on the programme and giving us a perspective on this alarming development from both the US and the UK. Well, let's now get to the view from Ukraine. Hannah Shelest is Director of Security Programmes at the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism. Now, Hannah, I mean, it's very harrowing when you hear the American spy chief saying that the longer this goes on, the closer we get to the probability that Putin could use a nuclear weapon. Does this ring true for you?
Definitely we try not to think about this opportunity, even that we understand that technically that is possible. And there are several reasons for this. First of all, we understand that Putin should really feel that he is completely losing. And only because he is completely losing, he would go to this decision. Because that is really big and serious decision, even for him. He is not mad. He is very outrageous person, but he is not mad. And he understands that even now, he already have all the international community reaction reaction. So what would be after such an attack? And also that is quite important that we understand that he's using the nuclear weapons topic as the playing with the muscles, as demonstrating that that is something only Russia and few other countries have. So that is something what other countries would not be able to oppose or to counter with something similar. That's why he would like to demonstrate how far he is able to go. That's why, as for now, we are trying to understand this situation more from the point of view of deterrence and forces demonstration rather than real reality. But we know that these conversations are happening in Moscow. That's why the statements from Washington are quite clear, because they understand that it is not only in the military plans, but it already moved to the political discourse.
I mean, that is surely something alarming. We've heard the propaganda coming from Putin before. We've all thought we're not going to take part in this game. We're not going to kowtow to his mad rhetoric, which is clearly designed to stop the West supporting Ukraine as his fight continues to seemingly ail in your country. But hearing someone like Avril Haines saying that, I mean, does that suddenly make the unthinkable that, you know, there should be any concession to Putin somewhere gamed in now? Because surely, and I'm not saying that this should be the position, but surely giving Putin something is better than the idea of a localized nuclear warhead in Ukraine.
First of all, what does mean giving something? Because that is the problem. Putin been already given something since at least 2008. And each time, let's remember the war in Georgia in August 2008. Let's remember 2014 with Crimea. We always thought that we are giving him something. Let's remember December talks at the highest level, Biden, Putin, and all others. That's demonstrated that as soon as you're giving one finger, Mr. Putin would like to have your whole hand. So that's why that is definitely not the reason. It's not that we are exaggerating situation or making it like evolving. That's just a reality that's already proved that he would like more blood. It doesn't matter what you give him. He would just like even more. Another thing is, like, you know, I cannot separate myself from being just a citizen and an academic. And we know the last 70 years of the nuclear deterrence. And such statements from the US side, they also are quite good in this theory of deterrence, because we always thought more of the nuclear weapons, that is good or bad, because it'd be not just the competition of how many warheads you have, but who would be more resolved to use them. As soon as we hear from another nuclear power, real nuclear power, that they understand what it is and they will be willing to protect Ukraine, it means, like, you know, the counter deterrence. And now it is already Moscow who should think, do they really need to use these nuclear weapons, or what can be the consequences against them? Because this time we can imagine that consequences will be not just providing Ukraine with the protection helmets or the Horowitz, but that would be the certain actions against the Russian Federation territory itself.
Hannah Shelest, thank you so much for coming on the programme. That's Hannah Shelest from Ukraine Prism, their foreign affairs think tank. Well, Belinda DeLucy, former Brexit Party MEP and political commentator, joins me in the studio. When I read that this morning, and it hasn't really erupted into UK headlines yet, I thought, well, this is different. This isn't the Kremlin making threats. This isn't some sort of Twitter argument that people are having about NATO expansion. This is the top spy chief in America warning that this could happen. And for me, I find that utterly harrowing. Where does this leave us?
Oh, in a very difficult position, as you have said. But, you know, for Finland, 5 years ago, polls were saying about 20% were keen on joining NATO. Now it's over 60%. And as a passionate Brexiteer, you know, every nation has the right to self-determine their own future, what they apply for and what they don't apply for. That includes, you know, Putin can't dictate to Finland and Sweden what they do, neither can we. And it was very interesting to hear the former president of Finland, President Medvedev, saying that the decision was already made for them whether to join NATO or not at 5 a.m. on the 24th of February, when Putin chose war, when Putin invaded Ukraine, the decision was made for them. Now, it's interesting about Finland, actually, because it has been preparing, probably since about 1992, when the USSR dissolved, for this sort of thing to possibly happen. And it has one of the only, if not the only, military conscriptions in Europe. It has been investing in its defence for the last 30 years, whereas we have been reducing our investment in our defence, and it is feeling prepared. It is quite a force. It is worrying, of course, but I think Finland has to do what it needs to do. It shares 800 miles border with Russia, and the border is very vulnerable. It's very easy for Russia to go into Finland, and it was only in 1939 that Russia invaded Finland, and they had to cede 10% of their geography to them. So for us to dictate to them is wrong. They have to do what they need to do, and we just have to look at the risks and see how we can smooth them over.
Linda, thank you. What do you think? Do we need to worry? Are we being complacent? Does NATO expansion provoke President Putin? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @GBNews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, as the government's resolve to build hundreds of thousands of new homes seems to wobble, I'm asking, will your kids ever get on the housing ladder? Time, though, for a quick break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Food on the table and a roof over your head, the bare basics of life. Well, at the moment, scores of people have neither. Queues outside food banks hardly reflect the government's promise to level up the nation. Now, the Minister for just that, Michael Gove, is getting a drubbing over the country's housing crisis, meaning millions will never get on the property ladder. Successive governments have done nothing. In fact, almost every policy seems to only make things worse. The stamp duty holiday during COVID meant haves upgraded their homes, driving up prices. Now, the governments have binned planning reforms to speed up making new housing stock in fear that Doris in Upper Toryville will vote Lib Dem. The number of houses being built doesn't even keep up with immigration. But young people don't vote Tory, so who cares? It's hard to imagine MPs do, as 1 in 6 of them are landlords, including a quarter of Tory MPs, with many earning more from their properties than they do from Parliament. When you get handed a taxpayer-funded gaff in the capital, where your MP salary of 84 grand would be laughed out the door by most estate agents in London, you can hardly be expected to sympathise, can you? Until, that is, MPs are made to live in dorms. Now there's a thought. Well, joining me in the studio is GB News business and economics editor Liam Halligan, and of course Belinda de Lucy, former Brexit Party MEP is still with me. Liam, so, I mean, Michael Gove has been across the airwaves today, hasn't he, trying to defend the policy, saying, oh, well, you know, we promised all these new houses, but if they don't look right and if they're not in the right places with the right infrastructure, what's the point? But there'll be loads of people out there saying, this is getting ridiculous. House prices are almost at record highs. Young people have no idea how they're going to get their first property, and that, of course, puts a huge pressure on parents. What's going on and what's the solution?
The market's completely broken. There's massive demand, there's limited supply. The big monopolistic house builders, they get loads of planning permissions. There's more than 1 million planning permissions outstanding that they haven't even used, but they build slowly to keep their profits high by making more money on a limited number of homes. It's an age-old story. Michael Gove, he has been out there making speeches about how he wants the UK to build more homes, to try and bring prices more, not to lower prices, but bring them more in alignment with wages as wages rise. But he's been put back in his box, frankly, by backbench Tory MPs who, as you rightly said, are worried about having their lunch eaten by the Lib Dems, as happened in that by-election on the edge of London in Chesham and Amersham recently. Michael Gove's also been making the running on social housing, council housing in old money, subsidised permanent homes for low-income and vulnerable workers. And there is some movement on that. I do think he's genuinely committed to building more council houses. Look, unless we have more council houses, we're never going to hit these targets of 250, 300,000 homes that we need, as you rightly say, to keep up with our basic demography in this country.
I mean, you can understand why there are people who don't necessarily want huge developments of sort of cheap-looking new builds pop up on our green and pleasant lands all across the Greenbelt. But there is a crisis here, surely, and this has got to be a ticking political time bomb.
Of course, because the political geometry is such, if people aren't becoming homeowners as they go into their 20s and their 30s and start families, the Tory voters of tomorrow aren't going to exist because they'll be voting for increasingly radical Labour governments who want to do something different. Look, the Greenbelt is 13% of the landmass of England, right? All residential property, including gardens, is 2%. Yeah, these are the numbers. The Greenbelt is absolutely massive. I live in a beautiful part of the UK in the east of England. I'm not saying you should build all over the Greenbelt, but you could build over 5% of the Greenbelt and have enough land to build enough houses in the next 50 years. And much of the Greenbelt is urban scrub. Much of the Greenbelt is golf courses. More of Surrey is golf courses than housing. It's insane. The Greenbelt's like a method of like keeping out the great unwashed from our green and pleasant land. We need to build more homes. And the reason homes are so pokey these days and such low quality, the new builds, is because the land market is completely out of control. 70% of what you're paying for when you buy a new build house is the land. Just 3 or 4 decades ago, it was more like 5 or 10%. We need major reform to the way land is traded in this country. But the Tories, they just haven't got the guts to grab this because of all the campaign donations they get from the property lobby.
I mean, it's disgusting, isn't it? When you hear the way Liam's outlined it there, you're a mother of 4 children in London. Heaven forfend if they want to get on the property ladder here. You're going to have to be richer than Rupert Murdoch.
I have a feeling my children are going to be living with me forever, or at least until they get married and can pool their salary with their husband.
Even then, it's tough.
Even then, it's tough. But it is, I think more and more parents are experiencing children living at home with them up until their 30s, and as well and good as it is giving them comfort and sanctuary, it's not great for young people. It's not a way to grow up. We need to have that disconnection of the umbilical cord where children can fly the nest and set up their own home, and it's becoming harder and harder for children. And I don't think when they turn 30, starting an adult world outside is good enough for having, so many parents are doing their washing for their kids, to cooking for them still at 25, 26. This isn't healthy for anyone. And I think, 15 years ago it was easy. My brother and sister bought a flat in Tooting and a flat in Stockwell about 15 years ago on mediocre salaries, and I don't think that's possible.
Decent parts of South London.
Well,
perfectly good.
They're all gentrified now.
Probably worth a lot these days.
Yeah.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Belinda. What are your views on this? Is home ownership becoming a thing of the past for young Brits? Should we care? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up after the break, are threats to rip up the Northern Ireland Protocol another move in a game of Brexit chess? And the Migration Minister is put under pressure as MPs cast doubt on whether the government's Rwanda plan might still work. Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon. It is 2:33. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date. The Prime Minister has signed a historic security agreement with Sweden as the Nordic country considers joining NATO. Boris Johnson says war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. He's due to sign a similar declaration with Finland later today. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted a re-evaluation of security for some of the Nordic countries. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to respond if they join the military alliance.
The war in Ukraine is forcing us all to make difficult decisions. But sovereign nations must be free to make those decisions without fear or influence or threat of retaliation. So I'm very pleased today with you, Prime Minister Andersson, to sign this mutual security assurances declaration.
An economic think tank is warning Britain's on course for a recession later this year. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says around 250,000 households could become destitute without immediate government action. A 150-year-old handwritten letter by Florence Nightingale is being put on show for the first time. In the letter, written in 1872, the pioneering nurse gave her support to a campaign led by the suffragettes to create a female teacher training college. That college is now known as the University of Chichester, where the letter will be displayed to celebrate International Nursing Day tomorrow. You're now up to date. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Will they, or won't they? Rip up the cursed Northern Irish Protocol, that is. The border down the Irish Sea, which treats Belfast as some sort of remote ex-colony when it comes to Britain sending stuff across the Irish Sea. Periodically threatened every time Liz Truss feels the need to talk tough, but markedly absent from the Queen's speech. Yet again, we are being told the government would unilaterally bin the ridiculous arrangement, to the dismay of the EU and its supporters, who then predictably threaten a trade war, and culminating in some Irish heritage-claiming Democrat in America wading in to score points with voters who couldn't even point to Dublin on a map. Joe O'Biden, in between one of his naps, has warned Boris to not go there. Well, perhaps we might tell him it's time to give Alaska to Canada and therefore to the Queen for a Jubilee present. We're joined now by our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, who's at Balmoral Park in Lisbon. Dougie, what's at stake here?
Well, what is at stake is the Good Friday Agreement. I'm here at Balmoral talking to farmers and politicians. Most of the unionist politicians are here. They've told me straight this morning it's the protocol or the Good Friday Agreement. Both cannot exist at once. And the elections here last week saw the DUP lose that First Minister's post, and that was partly because the TUV, the traditional unionist voice, stood against the DUP, cost them 66,000 votes. And I don't think the DUP will be too keen to go back. The problem is in 1998 there was those that could be seen as neutral negotiators here. We had the American Bill Clinton, we had Bertie Ahern in the Republic of Ireland, all that had no sovereign interest in Northern Ireland, and that allowed the likes of the PUP, the political wing of the UVF, to sign up to the Good Friday Agreement under the rules of consent. The protocol does away with consent, and relations between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, the unionists here, are probably the worst they've been since the early 90s. Simon Coveney, the Foreign Affairs Minister, is in Northern Ireland today, and he is no longer seen as a neutral. He is seen as one of the Europeans that enforced the protocol upon this part of the UK, and therefore unionists will not really take any interest in him. And they are telling me, and I have known unionism for a long time, these politicians today are definitely saying they are not going back in. They say that Gove promised them he would sort it out, Frost promised them they would sort it out, and Liz Truss promised them they would sort it out. They're saying they're not going back in until there is movement on the protocol.
Dougie, thank you ever so much. Dougie Beattie there, our GB News Northern Ireland reporter. Well, let's go back to my studio guest, Belinda de Lucy, former Brexit Party MEP and political commentator. Oh, Belinda, we know this one well, don't we? Oh. Sitting in the European Parliament as the oven-baked deal was being proposed, we said in the Brexit Party this will be a disaster. And now, years later, we keep hearing over and over again, we're going to unilaterally chuck the thing in the bin, call the EU's bluff, and nobody does. Do you think they should just get on with it?
I think they should have ripped it up a long time ago, and as soon as we left. I mean, I don't know if you remember at the time an EU diplomat saying that the price the British people are going to have to pay for Brexit is giving us Northern Ireland. They've been salivating, foaming at the mouth at the idea of using Northern Ireland as a stick to beat Brexit Britain with. I mean, we've experienced that atmosphere in the EU Parliament was very much like, oh, good, we have something we can get the Brits on. In a way, it wasn't a concern for the Northern Irish people. You can tell that because the Northern Ireland Protocol makes life very difficult for people in Northern Ireland who want to trade. I mean, for example, at the moment, if you want to go from Northern Ireland to England with your pets, you have to pay £280 for vaccines and a special passport, you know,
risk of being shot,
trading chilled meats. All these things are making the life very difficult. So all the sort of narrative that the EU has about, oh, we're so concerned about peace in Northern Ireland and the people of Northern Ireland, it doesn't fit. And Macron, compare his narrative to his Russian counterparts, you know, over the last few months. Oh, let's compromise, let's seek negotiation. He turns around to the UK and it's like, no compromise, no negotiation, you know, we're not budging on anything. And we're supposed to be his friends. You know, we helped them get rid of the Nazis in the Second World War, and yet he's treating us in such a hostile manner. I do think he plays his part in the Northern Ireland Protocol mess-up.
Yeah, no, do you know what? I say just do it. And if the EU want to start a trade war, it will hurt them as much as us, and the Gilets Jaunes will soon make Macron change his mind. Well, will they or won't they? Part 2. This time, Rwanda, in a farcical war of words between Priti Patel and people traffickers, where crooks have told their human cargo that the Rwandan threat is pure rubbish, while the Home Office says the first few migrants are about to be put on planes. All the usual characters are bending their sinews to stop it from happening anyway. Immigration lawyers, rights organisations, posh bleeding heart students and charities, and, of course, parliamentary committees who absolutely do not want this plan to take off, and certainly not a single flight. So will it happen? Or will it all just be a plan in tatters, where at least the government can blame everyone else but themselves? And even if it does take place, will the migrants stay put or just recommence the arduous journey back to Europe? Well, let's talk to GB News Home and Security editor Mark White first. Mark, you've been following the Home Affairs Select Committee today, which has been giving the Migration Minister a grilling on this.
Yeah, this is Tom Pursglove. He is the minister who is in charge of trying to tackle illegal immigration, and he was giving his first comments really since confirmation from the Home Office that the first group of asylum seekers who are supposedly going to be heading soon to Rwanda have been informed of that Home Office decision. Now, it's by no means certain that they will be heading there anytime very soon, because we're expecting that there will be a raft of legal challenges that are launched by a number of individuals, asylum seekers and associated campaign groups and charities. So watch this space for what happens in the coming days. But Tom Pursglove, anyway, talking to the Home Affairs Select Committee, said that he believed, OK, it wasn't a panacea, that in isolation the Rwandan policy would not end the small boat crisis in the Channel, and indeed the crisis also involving those who are still regularly smuggled over the English Channel or under the English Channel in lorries. So those, though, that are going to be sent to Rwanda, he believes that will act as a deterrent in conjunction with other measures that the government is going to come up with. Now, interestingly, he was asked by Diane Abbott, one of the committee members, about a situation that we've not heard an awful lot about, and that is the situation involving Rwanda and Israel. In 2014, between 2014 and 2017, some 4,000 failed asylum seekers were sent to Rwanda. They're to be apparently assimilated into that society. But of the 4,000 who were sent there, we're told that only 9 come 2018 remained in place. They had cited difficulties with the language, the culture, a complete lack of jobs, and so drifted off back into either other parts of Africa or into Europe to try to head back up to northern Europe again. As far as that policy is concerned, well, Tom Pursglove told the committee that he believed that the system that the British government had agreed with Rwanda was going to be a system that would work, because it is a system that also has at its heart economic development, which would allow for those asylum seekers to be better integrated into Rwanda. This is what he told the committee.
This is about providing opportunity in Rwanda for people to have prosperous and successful lives, where that sanctuary is provided, where protection is provided in Rwanda for those who seek it, and that there is support around skills, that there is support around jobs, and that there is support around integration and capacity building. That is entirely why this policy has been developed in the way that it has, to make sure that people are able to have that longer term sanctuary if that is what they themselves wish to have.
That was MP Tom Pursglove, and thanks, of course, to our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Well, joining me now on the show is Director of Communications at the Henry Jackson Society, Sam Armstrong. Sam, do you think a single plane with a single migrant in it's going to take off?
Well, it's certainly not going to take off in the next week or so, and we shouldn't get our hopes up about that. The trouble with this policy, in essence, is it's a little bit like deportation light. No one's getting straight on a plane the moment they arrive, as they do in Australia to Papua New Guinea. In actual fact, they're getting processed and deported through the courts and legal system in quite the same way that we've seen with foreign national offenders and all the rest of it. But we know from that the legal challenges very quickly come along, and with the legal challenges, the lawyers get stuck in, and delays and delays and delays, and no one goes very quickly at all. So until the government's new borders bill comes along, which they've put in the Queen's speech yesterday, is going to make its way through Parliament, I think actually the numbers are going to be very, very small indeed.
I mean, surely the risk here is we've had reports that people traffickers are saying to would-be migrants that, you know, if you're going to come across, you better come across now in case this does happen. And surely all of these delays and legal challenges are just racking up a massive bill for the Home Office.
Well, immigration is phenomenally expensive to this country. I live in central London and pay through the teeth to do so. But in the building behind me was a grand, several building wide, 6-story high hotel has been entirely turfed over. This is right in the centre of London. For migrants, wherever they go, the costs are exorbitant from the taxpayer to deal with them. Now, the people traffickers are always going to say whatever it takes to get themselves more money. But until the government comes up with a full and absolute policy, something that means that it entirely breaks the link, because there's just no point coming to the UK anymore, it's going to keep going because these people are taking the risk. And I thought it was really interesting that Mark brought up that just so few of those who Israel sent to Rwanda stayed there because they couldn't get a job, they couldn't get a living and all the rest of it. Well, these are exactly the same people we're told are refugees fleeing for their very life. Well, if that's true, why are they leaving a safe country in order to go and get a new job? Actually, what this is really about is people, entirely understandably, wishing to build a better life for themselves. They're economic migrants, and until you can destroy that link, it's always going to be worth it for people to travel here.
Sam Armstrong, Director of Communications, Henry Jackson Society, thank you so much. Belinda, when I read about this policy, I thought, well, come on, knowing what Britain's like is never going to happen. Yeah. But then, not long ago, I read a headline that we got no people picking fruit, and I thought, hello, we need migrants to pick fruit, and we got a load of migrants we don't know what to do with. Surely you could join dots.
No, that's called seasonal workers, so where they get a seasonal visa. So that's something separate. I think the problem with the Rwanda plan at the moment is it isn't happening straight away. So as it gets warmer, I can imagine many more people coming over to try and catch the last few months before they start sending planes off. But the planes are at risk of the usual sort of protesters who have done it before, where they hang onto the wheels, where they lie on the pathway so the planes can't take off. And that sent in pictures around the world, you know, that's going to worry Boris on how everything looks. So they need to secure these flights that are about to take, that are going to take the refugees, economic migrants off to Rwanda. There's a lot more to do to make the plan work. And I want to see thousands, not just hundreds, because let's be honest, the word refugee has been redefined now by human rights lawyers in their own minds as anyone fleeing poverty. And it's much harder to deport people now than ever. We belong to all these old-fashioned treaties that are just outdated and not fit for purpose now. We need to go to the heart of those treaties, like the Convention for Refugees 1951 treaty. We need to reset it in some way to adapt to modern-day globalised movement of people. 80 million people are displaced at the moment. It's only going to get worse for the UK. Boris better hope this works. I think it will really affect him in the next election if this carries on.
Yeah, tell you what, has never really spoken about, and that's the number of Albanians being trafficked by criminal gangs through those routes. Belinda, thank you so much. Now, there's been much to cheer this week with the Queen's speech full of Brexity goodness. I know what you're thinking. What's happened? Where has Boris-bashing misanthropic Miss Phillips gone? Don't worry, because you can always rely on our friends on the continent to remind us why the government's Brexit agenda was a battle worth fighting. It's time for the Alex Agenda. Now, with 38 EU agencies from the Community Plant Variety Office, which I assume names flowers, to aviation safety, which happily includes almost all European countries, Europol, the European Court of Human Rights, Schengen, and of course the EU itself, there already exist so many entities for European countries to join. One wonders how there's any unemployment across the Channel. Such is the state of the quangocracy. Oh, but not for Emmanuel Macron, wannabe president of the United States of Europe. No, he wants more. He wants a European political community to be some kind of EU light. What exactly would it do that the smorgasbord of other organisations don't already? But this is the man who'd probably set up his own fan club and make himself king of it. Do you know what? It's funny that all too often, the most rabid supporters of a Brussels empire seem to know the least about it. And if ever you wanted to know what our time, Belinda and I, was like as an MEP in Parliament, well, this pretty much sums it up. When you aren't aimlessly floating around Strasbourg's labyrinthine complex trying to remember where your office is without using GPS, or dodging the various social justice warriors spending EU coin on some sort of champagne reception for the preservation of lesser-spotted shield bugs, or giving your 1 minute's timed speech to a chamber of tumbleweed and some ushers dressed like Penguin from Batman, you're probably being subjected to a progressive Amdram on acid moment, gleefully filmed by Europhiles. Look at it. While Berlusconi looks on, wondering how he ever ended up reduced to such madness, where the dancing people are actually made to wear clothes. A parking space near Harrods is being offered up for 85 grand. And it's so small, you'd need to cut a hole in your roof to get out of your car. Now, if some utter cretin wants to waste their dirham on their chauffeur to experiment with car Tetris every day, that's up to them. But it strikes me that even at the eye-watering 20 quid for 2 hours to park near the world's most gaudy department store, that only costs 17 grand a year. And it gives the shameless sheikhs and playboy princes prime position to flaunt their velvet-clad Lamborghinis and jewel-encrusted Jeeps, while earning the council a few bob. Now, anyone who's been in Knightsbridge of a weekend will have witnessed the improbable phenomenon of a load of multi-million-dollar supercars being made to look like the sort of noddy car Liberace would have flounced up and down Sunset Boulevard. Belinda, anything to jump on with all of that?
Oh, just the Macron story. He is such a stubborn, childlike politician, and it comes across in all his sort of empire-building chat, and he does want to be, it's like, me, I want to be the leader, I want to be the leader, and he's just making life so difficult for the UK at the moment, so I'm glad you picked up on him. The dancing and floating through the EU Parliament, you're so right, it sums up the EU kind of story for me. It's about fantasy and things that don't really exist and pretend, and everyone just pretending they're a happy family when really underneath there's a huge power struggle. It's dominated by France and Germany, and it is actually quite fractious underneath, I think, the EU Parliament. But it was sweet to see them enjoying some. Who knows how much that cost the taxpayers, having all these dances done, but I love the story on that. It didn't make me miss the EU Parliament, though, I can tell you that.
Yeah, do you think actually anyone who supports the EU should be made to spend a month in the European Parliament, not earning, of course, the vast sums of money MEPs get that sort of change their loyalties quite quickly. But, you know, they should actually see it, because one thing I think is, you ask someone who loves the EU, what's the difference between the Council of Europe and the European Council? They don't know.
They have no idea about how the voting happens. When we were voting, the numbers taken were barely recorded correctly.
Oh, up and down like this, pressing
and they
buttons.
really discriminate against Eurosceptics in the Parliament. It is not this democracy haven. It is a fig leaf. It is a pretend democratic Parliament where they really scorn anyone who disagrees with the altar of the EU empire. As we've, experienced, we barely got a chance to speak at all. And if we try to wave our blue card, which gets us some minutes speaking, declined. So I wish they could spend a month in the EU Parliament. I know they'd be fed loads of champagne and be invited to lots of parties. We said no to it all, but I'm sure Europhiles would lap it up.
Aye, we had a good time, didn't we? Got a bit fat, but we had a good time. That's about it for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GBNews, same time, 2 o'clock. You know that by now. Tomorrow. Coming up next, it's the briefing with Darren McCaffrey. First, though, let's have a little peek at the weather forecast. Fingers crossed.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Rain eases across southern parts of the UK during the rest of the day. Further showers in the north, however, but with increasing clear spells developing in many places overnight. A weather front has approached from the southwest, and that's brought some wet weather across Wales, the southwest, and increasingly the Midlands, eastern and southern England through the early part of the afternoon. And during the rest of the day, that rain sweeps through the southeast with some lively downpours following for Lincolnshire and East Anglia. But they're out of the way by the night time, and then clear spells for many, but further showers will affect northern and western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well, and a bit of a breeze overnight. A cooler night to come, nevertheless, with those clear spells compared to recent nights. Temperatures down to 4 Celsius in sheltered parts of Scotland and mid to high single figures elsewhere. But plenty of sunshine on offer first thing Thursday, especially across England and Wales. I think cloud will build through the morning and a few showers will develop across Wales and the southwest. More especially, Scotland and Northern Ireland will see some showers and longer spells at times, particularly the northwest of Scotland. 13 Celsius here, 20 still possible in London, given the increased amounts of sunshine compared to Wednesday. And then clear spells for many overnight once again, but further cloud and rain